What is the best ever season by a point guard for the Indiana Pacers? That is what we will investigate today as we start a series looking at the best individual seasons in Pacers history by position. And did we just see the best Pacers point guard season ever? We'll dive into it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Friday. Congrats, you made it through the week, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're diving into a new series, this August series. Last year, or 2 years ago, we did What Ifs. Last year, we did the book club. Before that, we dove into the 2000 finals. I like to do history so you guys can learn more about the team, and selfishly, so I can learn more about the team. This year, I want to do the best Pacers seasons by position. So diving into all of them, trying to help myself. I already today am going to talk about a season that I can't believe how remarkable it is that I didn't know about it by a Pacers point guard, and try to find the best one by position. Remarkably, this is one of the worst positions, I would say, for the Pacers in terms of the best seasons. There's a lot of ways you could go about this, and I'll try to explain my methodology along the way, but that is what we're going to do this year. Also, you might be here thinking, why is there no schedule analysis? The schedule did come out yesterday. If you want to see the Pacers schedule, look it up. Hopefully, permitting, Adam and I will do our yearly show breaking down the schedule next Monday, going game by game, finding the hard stretches and predicting the Pacers schedule. Last year, that's when him and I figured out that they'd probably be a little better than they're giving credit for. And we were too low on them, but we were right that they were better than they were given credit for. So we'll do that Monday because I'm still on this trip and I couldn't coordinate with him fast enough. And if you want to listen to a player talk about Tyrese Haliburton with Team USA, his teammate, Micah Potter, was on this podcast yesterday, and people who listened to it texted me, messaged me, and said they really enjoyed that. So that is a good episode to listen to. And the second player interview appears to be booked. We'll see for next week. So let's dive into this, as I went way too long there at the beginning with stuff you should be listening to. What makes a point guard good? What makes a season by a point guard good? Because that kind of is a tricky part of this analysis. Because advanced stats, right? I don't want to come off lazy, right? I don't want to just go to Basketball Reference and sort by box plus minus and sort by win shares and do all that and say, oh, here's the best. That helps. That's valuable to as a starting point. But at different times, point guards have been different in what they have required for the Pacers. George Hill, we'll be talking about him a lot today. He, as Rick Carlisle has talked about, even though Rick Carlisle didn't coach George Hill with the Pacers until the very end of George Hill's career, was such a unique defender, changing the way pick and rolls were defended in the NBA, right? And so his stats weren't remarkable, but he was still so impactful for those teams and was really not a point guard by trade. It was more off the ball, but was really their point guard and was pretty good, right? Mark Jackson passed up a storm, right? In a time when that was pretty hard to do and pretty rare. Don Busey, whatever. I probably will say his name wrong 1,000 times today. I apologize. Was an amazing defender, a steals machine. Vern Fleming was exceedingly underrated. In fact, I'm going to say today, if you are a Pacers historian and you're much better at this, and you were, I'm young, I couldn't watch games in the 80s because I wasn't alive. I think you're going to think I'm underrating Vern Fleming today. And I will admit that right now, because I have heard from a lot of people who watched them and interviewed people that Vern Fleming's very good. And I had to bake that into what I was doing today for this exercise. But when I kept coming out with what I would, looking back on and what I have watched, right? I've watched a lot of, as many as I can find, 90s, 2000s, et cetera, games. I couldn't get Vern very high for any of his individual seasons, even though he had a lot of very good seasons. So it was kind of interesting to go back and think, what is a point guard? What did they mean for the team they were on? How good were they specifically, right? So let me talk about some of the contenders for seasons we're going to talk about today. And for you young people, for you older people, for you people who listen to this all the time, you'll know that we're going to talk about Tyrese Haliburton a lot today. And I know that's going to sound like some recency bias. It probably is. Proximity bias is certainly a thing for everybody ever. But if you just look at the history of Pacers All-NBA appearances, that was the first one by a Pacers point guard. It just happened. They've had some two guards. They've had lots of forwards. They've had a few centers. The only point guard ever to be an All-NBA player for the Indiana Pacers was Tyrese Haliburton last season. If you go through their all-star game selections all time, Tyrese Haliburton, the last 2 seasons, I'm not counting the ABA here. If you wanted to, you could. Don Buse in the 1970s made an all-star team as point guard. That's it. All the rest are forwards and centers and whatever you count Oladipo as wing guard, whatever, right? So on the criteria alone of accolades, and I'm not using that to be my final product, but like those highlights alone put Haliburton's season he just had at a very high spot as a starting point, right? And leading the league in assists matters a great deal, and setting the Pacers franchise record for assists per game matters a great deal. We're going to contextualize those stats later, so don't just read into that, but over 2 assists per game, more than anyone else ever. In fact, the Pacers have only had 7 seasons ever with someone at 8 assists per game. Haliburton was nearly at 11. He didn't meet the 2 seasons ago. Remember, he didn't meet the games played criteria for assists, but still would have been like, if you gave him 2 games of 0 assists, still would have been top 2 or 3 in the league. Like, he's just a machine with the passing. So if you view that as important for point guard play, you probably rate him very highly, right? Among the many things he does well. Now, something interesting is certain stats say that, the last 2 seasons of Haliburton were by far the best season by a Pacers point guard ever, right? I think it's important with the advanced stats to do this exercise, though. Advanced stats are designed to measure impact, not talent, first of all. And as we progress more and more into basketball and there's more and more data, and we figure out what, as observers, what is the most impactful thing players can do with modern spacing, with modern efficiency, with the way the game is played now, things are more tailored to, actualizing, even though you can't actually do it. And it's not like a fair way to describe basketball, but it's easier to have better advanced stats now than it was in the past, right? It just is. It's easier to have higher true shooting percentages and all that. In fact, if you look through the Pacers' history of the best true shooting percentage seasons ever, Aaron Nesmith, just this past season, had one of the 10 most efficient seasons ever, right? People don't think of Aaron Nesmith even close to that, but that's how, like, the modern game and the shot profile he has is very valuable. In fact, outside of Reggie Miller seasons in the 90s, all of the top 10 Pacers seasons in terms of efficiency from a true shooting percentage perspective were in the last 5 years, right? So that matters. Being more efficient helps your stats, helps your advanced numbers. So, like, there's going to be a natural skew towards the modern. But Haliburton's, a lot of his advanced stats compared to other Pacers point guards all time are way above them. Like, it's not even close. So the last season Haliburton had is going to be up on this list. I'm not going to say where yet, but that's going to be there. Another very strong contender for me when looking through this was George Hill in 2012-13. That was the year before Lance really took off as a creator. Pacers lost in 7 in the conference finals that year to the Heat, and he was the 14-point per game scorer, 37% from deep, 5 assists per game with that slithery defense we talked about earlier that Rick Carlisle has praised so much in recent seasons. He obviously had better scoring seasons. With Utah, he was a 17 points per game guy. He even was, in the year PG, was out a 16 points a game guy with Indiana and a 5 assists per game guy that year. But in terms of his impact to the Pacers and what was required of him, that was his best season to me with the Pacers. You could argue that that season is why it's important to say, what is a point guard, right? Their role on the team is really important. Another season that obviously is going to be ranking very high, Mark Jackson, 1997-98. Phenomenal year, phenomenal player, phenomenal at a lot of things. He obviously, his all-star appearance came with the Knicks. That was his best Pacers season to me, especially as you look through the history books. That was probably the best Pacers team ever, as I talk to people who have covered and watched the team for years, even though they made it farther 2 years later. Mark Jackson that year played all 82, almost 9 assists per game, very good scorer, good defensive guy as well for his size. He is not a good play finisher. It didn't really matter. He was a great floor general, had the funky back it down kind of game, a real table setter. And we'll get into some context on why I particularly rate his passing at that time very highly, because I think the raw numbers do not do it justice. Here's the season that caught me off guard that we're going to talk about today. Michael Williams. He was on a team along with Vern Fleming and some other ball handlers. So it's fuzzy if he is truly a point guard or not. LaSalle Thompson on those teams, Vern Fleming on those teams. Reggie had the ball a lot. Chuck Person had the ball a lot in this particular season that we're about to talk about. So, like, actual floor general duties, we'll duck and dive around those. He led those teams in assists by far, though. So I think it's he is a point guard, but it's extremely fair to talk about that. In 1991-92, Michael Williams was 15 points a game, 8.2 assists per game, 2.9 steals per game, and made second team all defense. That's a phenomenal season. That's impactful on both ends level stuff. You don't hear about him a lot in Pacers history, and that's because he only spent 2 seasons with the franchise, and it wasn't a time where they were like amazing. They were pretty good, but they weren't amazing yet. But making an all defense team as a guard, that has to matter a great deal as you kind of are evaluating this stuff. So that one stood out to me as like, wow, I know who he is. Like, I've heard of him. I believe I watched 1 or 2 games of his tape diving through the Pacers before. That team got swept in the first round by the Celtics. The year before, they lost in the first round to the Celtics. So both years they had him on the team, that was the result. But that season statistically holds up very well. And some other seasons we'll dabble in today. A little bit of Jamal Tinsley, pre-brawl especially. We'll get into a lot of Vern Fleming seasons. And 1976-77 Don Buse, which is relevant because that's the first season the Pacers were in the NBA. I'm not doing ABA seasons for this exercise, but 3.5 steals per game. His first All-Star appearance and the first Pacers All-Star in the NBA. First team all-defense that year. And that's relevant because there's only one all-defense team that year, and he was on it. So a very, very relevant and strong season for, I hope I'm saying his name right. I know I've said it before. But either way, if I'm getting it wrong, I apologize. Those are some of the contenders. Let's dive into some of the stuff that made some of them stand out, fall behind, why they're in contention for this spot as we dive into the best point guard seasons in Pacers history. Before we get rolling, though, let's talk about Gametime, an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball who makes getting tickets faster and easier for sporting events. Prices in the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. I used the app to go watch the Liberty play the Dallas Wings last summer. Spot on sales pitch from them. No guesswork. You could see what the view from your seat was going to be in the app before you got there. You can take out the hidden fees and see the price you're going to pay before you get to the final page. And it was exactly right. You know you're getting the best deal because they have the Gametime guarantee. Will credit you if you find cheaper tickets elsewhere. They have all-in pricing, zone deals, and flash deals. Everything you could want from a ticket purchasing app. Best way to do it for anything, sports, comedy, theater, whatever. Check out Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute ticket, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen. Any team you're interested in their schedule. Pacers have a unique one because their Paris trip next year. Lots of teams with lots of national TV games. Without looking at national TV games, am most interested in the Orlando Magic. How many national TV games do the upcoming Magic have? Philip Rossman-Reich and Locked On Magic would be the way to go. All right, let me talk about some things that stood out to me as like, oh, that is worth adding context to when it comes to these seasons. One is talking about Mark Jackson. Because if you just read his screen, his basketball reference page, right? That season with the Pacers that I referenced, 8.7 assists per game in 1997-98, which many consider, and a lot of all-in-one stats consider, his best season with the Pacers. That sounds great, and it is great. In fact, until Tyrese Haliburton last season, that was the most assists per game and the most assists in a season by a Pacers player. Played all 82 games, very healthy. Played very well. The other important distinction to make is that is not a pass happy time in the NBA. In fact, what's the opposite of a pass happy time in the NBA? The 1997-98 season finished with 22 assists per game for the league average, which ranks 50th out of every NBA season ever. Much closer to the bottom than the top. The most recent season in which Haliburton broke Mark Jackson's record, the average was 26.7 assists per game. That's first ever. Now, that's a new trend because the next 10 seasons after last year were all in the 80s and late 70s, right? So this is a new trend from the NBA, and Haliburton is certainly bucking that. And he was so far ahead of Jackson in assists per game and assists that I can't just say, oh, it's how the game is played now. He is a substantial, like there is a gap in that passing. But Mark Jackson, in a season where team average was 22 assists per game, was getting 9 himself. The year before that, he hit that number that I just mentioned. He split time between the Nuggets and Pacers. That was 96-97. With the Pacers in 30 games that year, 9.8 assists per game. With Denver, 12.3 assists per game that season. And the season that we're talking about was also a 22.1 this time, but still assists per game season. So his passing then was like, boom, eons. Not that, I mean, that sounds insane, but like significantly better than what you would see from, basically anyone else in terms of volume and what specifically he was asked to do. I want to pull up the league averages for players completely those seasons, just so you can see how head and shoulders above and how much of a load he was carrying with the assists at the time. Yeah, one of only 3 guys above 8.6 assists per game. Jason Kidd, a master passer, and Rod Strickland that season were the only guys ahead of him. And that's in the 8s, right? Like that's very different than what you see today with your Treys, your Haliburtons, or Lucas, whatever. The year before that, when he was at 11.4 assists per game, that season I can't count for this exercise because he spent part of it with the Nuggets, but that led the league and was one of only 2 players above 9.3, right? And John Stockton, an absolute legend, was the other one, right? This was not a time of high passing, of simple ball movement, of the thing flinging around the court, right? So that really stood out to me as I kind of dug back, because that's what that team needed with Reggie and Davis's and all sorts of mouths to feed of talent. To have someone like that, a table setter, I think was really important for those teams. And I think to do it in an era where it wasn't as simple, and we're talking about a 5 assists per game difference, like per teams and in a game. It's not a huge difference, but that really stood out to me as like, oh, that should absolutely be baked in to this discussion. I'm going to put a lot of stock into an all defense season for Michael Williams. All defense on its own is something spectacular. And he was definitely the last all defense guy that season, but that matters a lot. And even if you look at like defensive win shares, defensive box plus minus stats that can help contextualize those seasons for people like me who weren't alive to really dive in, he holds up very well, right? It looks like he was the level of player that these stats actually suggest that he was. So I'm going to put a lot of stock into that specific season and what you could get there. Let's talk about Vern Fleming for a bit here, because Vern Fleming spent almost his whole career with the Pacers. He had a blink of a season with the Nets and then went over to France. So that really matters in terms of his career impact with one franchise. The trouble I have with him in a couple ways is, one, not always being a starter. There were other point guards he was for, a lot of the late and mid 80s seasons, but then he came off the bench, including behind Mike Williams and Mark Jackson for blinks. But is he really the point guard on some of these teams, right? Like on some teams he wasn't. And either way, like he has a lot of really good seasons, but no like obvious standout amazing years. I think if I had to pick a year for Vern, and the one I put in my notes to talk the most about some of these late 80s season, in particular, the one that's going to rise to the top. And I feel bad for people that are going to say, you're dumb. Vern Fleming was awesome. Because again, people who covered these teams and were around the Pacers back then and said, yes, Vern Fleming was super good, right? He averaged 14 and 7.5 in 1989-90. He played all 82 games. He shot 35% from deep, although he didn't take that many threes. Over 50% from the field. Good defensive numbers. That's a really good player. That's a really good season, right? So I would pick that probably as the season that stands out to me the most. He was like a good rebounder, triple-double machine for a guard, right? He averaged almost 5 rebounds per game in 87, 88. He has a lot of seasons that hold up very well, but none of them look like, oh, this is clearly a top 5 season by a point guard in Pacers history. But if this was an exercise of the best career by a point guard in Pacers history, he's for sure getting his way into the mix. I want to talk about Jamal Tinsley for a second. He's not going to get into the top 5. He started as this all-rookie player for the Pacers and was like, wait, what? He's averaging how many assists per game already? 8 per game as a rookie, and I think he was finished third in Rookie of the Year that year. And then like, oh my gosh, he's a 15 points per game scorer. And then everything changed with the brawl. His passing level never reached the same. He wasn't playing as much. Some of the scoring went like he had a 12 and 8.5 season in his final season with the Pacers, but he played less than half the games. And 3 times he played less than 43 games for the Pacers. He has a lot of seasons that make you think, man, if he could have held this level up somehow, you're talking about a terrific player. 2 triple-doubles as a rookie, right? The efficiency was never really there at a high level. In fact, the best percentage he shot from the field for the Pacers in a full season was that 40-game 04-05 season, 41.8%. That's not very good. But he has a lot of statistical stuff that makes you go like, oh, whoa, this guy could have been something special. Like these numbers look like Vern Fleming numbers, but no one talks about him like that. And I'm not going to either. I'm just saying it looked like early he had good enough seasons to get into this conversation at his best, but he did not end up finishing that way or even getting close to that sort of level as a player. And I think all of these, contextual things are really important as we dive into the best seasons by a point guard in Pacers history. And I think that's kind of the end of that kind of stuff. If you look at like value over replacement player, box plus minus, all this stuff I already talked about, all the best Pacers seasons were, most of them, outside of the guy we're going to name the winner today, were wings, forwards, centers, etc., except for 2 seasons. And so who had the best individual one season by a Pacers point guard ever? Let's close that out with this conclusion. Before we do that, though, we are going to talk about FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never wanted to stop. That's why I'm in Philly right now, so I could go see the Philadelphia Phillies play. But the NHL is done. The WNBA had a long break, finally back, thankfully. The Olympics filled a gap, but the NBA was done too. There's just fewer games once Summer League is done. There's a lot less going on in the summer. The sports, especially when the WNBA was on break, we're not sportsing like I wanted. Thankfully, FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer on FanDuel with a daily booster bonus, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Make your second listen Locked On Timberwolves. They're on national TV opening night playing the Lakers, and Edwards is coming for the face of the league crown. If he can get it, Locked On Wolves will have more on that. And here on Locked On Pacers, we're going to continue to try to find the best season by a Pacers point guard of all time. For you people who are much older than me and have experienced these seasons, I hope you have not grown 1,000 times. That is my goal. People my age or younger, I hope I can add context to seasons you maybe didn't watch or don't know anything about. And people older than me, I hope I don't sound like a moron who makes you groan and go, no, that's wrong, or what are you talking about, or whatever. I hope that is how this is going. Let me do my final rankings here. So I was very tempted at first to try to do 5 seasons by 5 different players, right? And that shouldn't be the point of the exercise, right? If Tyrese Haliburton has 2 of the best 5 seasons, if Mark Jackson has 2 of the best 5 seasons, if George Hill has 2 of the best 5 seasons, whatever, then they should be there. In my head, that makes sense. And that's what the final list is going to look like. But I do think that there's an argument to make to split it up into the best 5 guys just to get 5 on the list. And so if I had to rank 5 seasons by different individuals as the best 5 seasons by a Pacers point guard in history, the 5 names in a random order would be Michael Williams, Mark Jackson, Don Buse, Tyrese Haliburton, and George Hill. Those 5 players, I think, at some point in time in the history of the Pacers franchise, put together the best season by a Pacers point guard. Vern Fleming, just outside the cut to me. But obviously a phenomenal player, again, who had a phenomenal season with the Pacers. If I actually had to rank the best seasons, I think 2 Tyrese Haliburton seasons get into the mix. 22-23, of course, his first All-Star season and last season, I think are both in the top 5 best Pacers seasons by a point guard of all time, which is not fun for this discussion. And again, proximity bias is real. It's real for every person ever, and it's happening right now, so it's very easy to contextualize these things. But I do think that 2 of his seasons are in the top 5 we've ever seen. So let's go 5 to 1. I think the 5th best season by a Pacers point guard of all time belongs to 2012-2013 George Hill. 14 points, 14.2 points, 4.7 assists per game. Very good defender, leader, and organizer of a very good team. Did not turn it over an abhorrent amount. It was a lot, like for him, but it's only 1.5 per game. That's not a big deal. Did not foul very much. Had good steal numbers. Made his free throws. Was good on and off the ball. I thought at the time trading him for Jeff Teague was a mistake, although Jeff Teague played pretty well for the Pacers. Jeff Teague, maybe I should have said his name earlier. He actually played an okay season for the Pacers, but definitely not one of the best 5 point guard seasons the Pacers have ever seen. That was definitely George Hill's best season with the Pacers. That was his only season over 1,000 points scored in his entire career, finishing well. He played well throughout the playoffs in every single game that he played. And in that postseason, his 2-point shot didn't fall, but his 3 fell. He defended okay. He was passing 77 assists in his 18 games in that postseason. I think that was George Hill's best Pacers season, and probably given what his role had to be, averaging 14.5 and 4.5 in the playoffs was good for that team. They were very close to the finals. I give a lot of team success here, but his role was very unique, and I think George Hill gets the 5th best season in the history, except that's actually ranked 6th on my list because I forgot that Haliburton's going to get 2 of these. That's the 6th best Pacers point guard season. 5th, we're going to Michael Williams, the season that I just really had to dive into for the first time today. In 1991-92, I've already made a lot of the pitches for why. All defense at point guard, very impressive with that 2.9 steals per game. That's a remarkable number for a steals per game season. That's actually 3rd in Pacers history. The only 2 ahead of him, we're going to talk about one of those seasons as a better point guard season for the Pacers, and all the guys behind him, again, are wings or forwards because it's easier to get steals at those positions. So remarkable in that way. Over 8 assists per game. That number climbed for him the following season, but that was not with the Pacers. It was with the Minnesota Timberwolves. 15 points per game. He shot 49% from the field. That's solid, even without a 3-ball. And in that era, he didn't take many threes at all anyway. So good efficiency, good defense, setting up other players. Finished 11th in most improved player and 2nd team all defense. Terrific advanced stats that suggest he was a very positive player on both ends of the floor with almost 60% true shooting. That's a great season. Turnovers are the only thing holding this back from being like a remarkable, like, wow, why did this guy not get more love historically for the Pacers? But a very high turnover rate for Michael Williams that season. That finishes 5th for me in the best Pacers point guard seasons of all time. 4th, this is where I have trouble actually parsing things out. 4th year, I went with Tyrese Haliburton in 2022-23. So 2 seasons ago, for not last season, but the one before that for the Pacers star guard. A lot of the reason you can't go too much higher, I can't, is games played. 56 only, because the scoring, that's actually still his best scoring season ever at 20.7, over 10 assists per game, which would have been the Pacers franchise record if he played enough games. He was just a few off. Shot it very well, right? That was his most efficient season with the Pacers in terms of true shooting percentage for a full season. His assist rate led the league that year. It did not last year, right? But was not his best season with the franchise in total. The games played number matters a great deal. He became a better defender last year than he was that year, even though both numbers are not, phenomenal in either way. That was his highest turnover season with the Pacers so far. A very good year for Tyrese Haliburton. Among the top 5 best seasons by a point guard in the history of the Pacers franchise, but not the best, not in the top 3. 3rd for me, Don Buse. There we go. I think this might be the one that gets people to go, in 1976-77. So that would be the first season that the Pacers were in the NBA. All-Star that year. Again, the first Pacers All-Star ever, which was phenomenal, although there were 2 that year, him and Billy Knight, as they came over to the NBA. Shooting, not great from the field, but with the passing that he had, leading the league with 8.5 assists per game. And again, at a time when passing was not as easy as it is now statistically. And in the 70s, it even ramped up a little more later on. But in 77, 76, the league finished with, I can't find this fast enough, 23 assists per game. So like 4 under what we're seeing these days. So certainly tougher to be the league leader and hit the numbers that he hit in that season. But the standout thing is the defense just looks phenomenal in terms of steals, in terms of impact, low fouls while getting that many steals, right? That kind of guy is setting your team in motion, and that is really valuable. Really good player. Really good season for the Pacers. Of course, was a legendary Pacers ABA player on a title team, an ABA All-Star the year before the Pacers came to the NBA. He led the league in ABA and NBA in consecutive seasons in both assists and steals. Phenomenal, and played 81 games in 76-77. Really good player. Looks really great on both ends. Season holds up historically very well. That for me finished number 3. Number 2 and number 1 I think will be no surprise to anyone except I hope anybody. Number 2, let's go with Mark Jackson in 1977-78. As we talked about a lot, the best Pacers passing season ever until last year. Very impactful as a table setter. I think that this should be 3. I think that this should be behind the Don Buse season I just talked about. But this season was phenomenal from Mark Jackson for the best Pacers team, for what many consider to be the best Pacers team of all time in terms of the quality that they had. They went 58-24 and pushed MJ to 7 that year before losing in the conference finals. And Mark Jackson, a huge part of that. Mark Jackson averaged 8.7 assists per game. Only one other player averaged more than 2.3, and that was Travis Best, his backup, ironically. So phenomenal for Jackson to be able to do that. His defense was pretty good. He finished well enough inside the arc, got to the line when he needed to, made life easy for Reggie, made life easy for Jalen Rose and Chris Mullin. Made really paired well with Rick Smits. This should be 2 or 3. I'm kind of wondering if I should have made this 3, but obviously a phenomenal season from Mark Jackson at the time. One of the best in Pacers history. But number 1, I think most of you probably could have predicted this before this episode started. We just saw it. We just saw the best season by a point guard in Pacers history. It's Tyrese Haliburton's 2023-24 season. That probably got a groan from someone who knows the franchise's history better than me. The scoring, the leading the league in assists, the Pacers' all-time record for assists in a season, the All-Star appearance, the All-NBA appearance. The first 3 months of the season may be the best 3 months by any Pacers player ever. We'll talk about that. I'd have to dive into a lot of other 3-month stretches by Pacers players. But, I mean, through the in-season tournament finals, just an unbelievable, like, floating, just him and the defender kind of player. Offensive engine on a level we've never seen before. And a lot of the advanced stats say that that was the best season by a Pacers point guard by a lot. Like, so much more than anyone else. And I didn't want to rely on advanced stats for this entire exercise. But, win shares over indexes on defense, box plus minus over indexes on certain stats. But an exceedingly impactful season from Haliburton. You all just watched it, so I don't need to sell you on it too much. But the shooting, especially before the injury, the passing, the level of impact he had on the best offense in NBA history until the Boston Celtics of last season came along. Phenomenal player, phenomenal season, and we'll see if he can top it. But that is the best season by a Pacers point guard of all time, in my opinion, and we will register these as we rank every season by a Pacer for the final project of this. Let me know what I got right and wrong. You can tweet at me at Tony R. East or the show at Locked On Pacers. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you could say, hey, you idiot, you got all the history stuff wrong. This guy should be higher. This guy should be lower. That guy wasn't even a point guard for the team, you dummy. But I hope I did well to serve old Pacers players and teams well. Back Monday talking Pacers schedule. It's out. We got all 80 plus the preseason because we don't know the final 2 for the in-season tournament just yet. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. We will see you here on Monday.